Hi, this is Bruce Buffer, your voice of the Octagon, and you're listening to MMA Mental.
Okay, we are now joined by Big John McCarthy, pretty much the man who was the original referee in UFC. He didn't referee UFC 1, but he come UFC 2 and then basically made it his house then for a long, long time. So, John, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
And how are things with you?
Everything's going great for me. Enjoying life.
Well, I've been a huge fan of mixed martial arts, and especially UFC, right from the early days. And I'd love to get your views on some of your of some of the matches from the early days and what it was like refereeing in those days. Obviously, the rules were a lot different then to what they are now.
Just a little bit.
Now, obviously, originally it was the UFC was all about tournament format, and it was set up as being no holds barred. And I think one of the things that stood out to me watching it and watching you as a ref, you were not allowed to stop the fight. What was it like being in a cage and not having that control?
It was horrible. Honestly, people think, "Oh, what have we done?" It was horrible because there was at the time, look at people look back, they look back with a different, viewpoint of what was really happening at the time. People honestly did not know how to fight, a no rules fight. It wasn't something that was commonplace. There was few people that really knew what to do, and you had people going in there and thinking that they were going to be successful doing certain things, and quickly finding out that they weren't. They had gone and told their corners, don't throw the towel. And so the corner was sitting there saying, believing in their fighter, but going in there saying, I'm not going to throw the towel. The fighter would get hurt to the point they were unconscious. The corner wouldn't throw in the towel. And so it was this position where you really couldn't stop the fight under the way the rules of what they wanted done were put in place. So it was, as I say, it was horrible for me. And it was, after the very first show I did, I talked to Rorion Gracie and told him, hey, thank you very much, but I will never do that again. And he goes, why? It was great. And I told him, Rorion, I said, look, you know your brother knows what he's doing. You know that your other brothers would take care of him if he was in trouble. And these other people don't have the common sense to do that. And no disrespect in any fashion, but you're going to get someone seriously hurt because the other people are clueless about this type of fighting. I said, you're allowing people to do things as far as they can stomp on the guy's head. I'm supposed to stand there and watch someone get stomped on their head until their head, crushes. I said, that's ridiculous. I can't do that. I have to be able to stop the fight if the person, and that's when I came up with it, they cannot intelligently defend themselves. I have to be able to stop the fight. And he thought about it for a while and said, okay, you know what? All right, we'll do it that way. But I don't want you just stopping the fight. I said, okay, no problem. Look, this is when I'll stop it. And it just kind of moved on from there.
So when was the first time they kind of gave you the authority to step in and stop the fight if the fighter wasn't intelligently defending themselves?
UFC 3.
So you did get it in for UFC 3?
Yep. You can go back and look and, you can see that there was fighters. Roland Payne fought Harold Howard, and he got hit with a shot, and he was unconscious. And, as he hurt, and I jumped in and stopped the fight, and it was the way it should have been. And the purpose of fighting is not to, in the end, it shouldn't ever be to hurt people. It's to be competitive, to show your technical skill and your competitive advantages over your opponent. And, at the end of the fight, hopefully both guys are uninjured and can walk out and come back and fight again if they want. Injuries are going to happen anytime you have people, in a combative situation. The possibility of injuries is there, but no fighter wants to go in to a fight knowing that they're going to permanently damage their opponent. That's not the way most fighters are. They want to go in, they want to win, they want to be competitive, but they don't want to permanently damage, the guy across from them.
Now, obviously, you were referring to UFC 2 when you didn't have the control, and that was a 16-man tourney, which was unusual in itself because the first one was 8, and there was some very, very brutal knockouts at that event. Was there any of the knockouts? Was there any of those knockouts that made you want the rules changed?
Oh, going back to UFC 2, it was the very first fight that happened was between, a gentleman named Scott Morris and another 18-year-old kid named Sean Dougherty. And, in that fight, it lasted about 32 seconds. And, Scott Morris ends up taking, Sean Dougherty down with a beautiful little toss that he does. He ends up in mount. He neck cranks him. Sean Dougherty ends up tapping out. And I looked and said, well, this is easy. And the next fight that happened was Pat Smith against Ray Wizard. And Pat Smith catches Ray, who I knew, a good karate guy, very fast, but not a real, you think of fighter. He's not a guy that's been in competitive fights. He ends up catching him in the guillotine. I see Ray go unconscious and stop the fight. And it's like, this is no problem. Well, from that match on, things started happening. And I started saying, oh, my God, I got problems. And it was the Orlando Wheat first fought a guy named Robert Lucarelli from New York. And in that fight, he was starting to absolutely annihilate Robert in the fight. And I had told the corners before the fight. I told them in the rules meeting that we had, which obviously there wasn't much for rules, but I had told them, hey, if your fighter is starting to have problems, I'm going to point to you and say, keep an eye on your fighter. And if I think they're really starting to have problems, I'm going to point to you and tell you, watch your fighter. And if they're in trouble, I'm going to point to you and tell you, throw your towel. And, I went through that entire sequence, and I told them, throw the towel, and they weren't. And, finally after, Orlando Wheat landed a bunch of elbows to the back of his head, and Robert Lucarelli was crawling on the ground, trying, just to move. And they finally throw the towel, and I went over to him, what is wrong with you? Why did you not throw it earlier than that, right? And they looked at me and they said, he told us not to throw the towel. He told us he would kill us if we threw the towel. And from that moment, I go, oh, my God, I got problems. I got corners that aren't going to throw the towels. And that happened in, the next series of fight when they had the second round, Scott Morris against Pat Smith. Scott Morris is getting killed by Pat Smith. He gets, he goes to do a throw. His foot slips. He ends up being mounted. Pat lands some elbows. And I'm yelling in his corner, throw the towel. They looked at me and took the towel and threw it into the audience. Shook their head no. And I'm like, this is bad. And so there was some bad knockouts that happened, and there was some bad things that, luckily, it didn't have a bad ending. Nothing really happened off of it. Or that could have been right there, the end of the sport, just off of doing things that were not, consciously thought out in a smart way in the beginning. But, we worked through it, and from that point, we constantly changed things throughout the sport, to try to make it more palatable to people, to make it, still be, very raw and open type of fighting system, but more and more towards a sporting aspect.
It's funny because you talk about some of those fights, and I remember both those fights, and Orlando Wheat was actually walking away from Lucarelli and then realised the fight wasn't over and jumped back in. And of course,
Yep.
Pat Smith with those elbows, he brutalised Scott Morris, so that was vicious. But he actually got up himself and walked away because I think he knew he'd done enough damage, didn't he?
I actually, that whole thing was with Pat Smith. I was yelling at the corner so much Pat thought I told him it's over. And I didn't, but thank God he thought that because he jumped up off of him because of it. And, like I said, luckily things worked out, but it was not a good situation.
When you refereed that first event at UFC 2 and seeing how that event played out, could you imagine that all these years later we'd be here now with the sport the way it is?
At that time, no, I couldn't imagine it being the sport that it is now. No, it's completely different, and it's gone through so many, evolutions and progressions, and the fighting is different, so different. You can go back and you watch some of those old fights, and it's almost comical in some ways, the fighting styles and the things that guys would do compared to what is now such a technically and athletically, oriented sport.
Now
two different worlds.
Going back to the old days, who were some of your favourite guys to referee in the old UFCs?
I liked everyone. I didn't have I honestly did not have a problem with anyone. I didn't care. I was there to do my job. I liked them all. I liked, Hoyce was someone I had known before the UFC came about, so obviously I liked him. I liked Ken Shamrock. I thought he was a great guy. I had, Dan Severn comes in. I liked Dan Severn. I liked, the guys that didn't do well. I mean, there was guys they were really nice guys, that didn't do well. I still to this day talk to Fred Eddish, and I took Fred Eddish out to lunch probably a month ago, when I was in Kansas City, and all of them. I like them all. I was never there as rooting for one over the other. My thing was to do my job and to make sure that I did it to the best that I could do it under the rule set that I had, and that was all I really cared about.
With regards to Tank Abbott, obviously he had a persona. How much of that was real, and how much of that was he playing up to the cameras to play the villain?
Oh my God, Tank his persona is all. I was with Tank Abbott last night, so that tells you. Look at Tank Abbott is a very smart individual. He played a role very well. He made people believe things. He is, he's a great salesman, and if people at one point did I ever have a problem with Tank? Yeah, he when in a drunken state threatened my wife, and so I went trying to find him and stuff, and I had a problem with that because you don't do that. But other than that, fighting wise or anything, Tank Abbott was just one of the guys. I didn't care. He would say outlandish things. You got Chael Sonnen saying outlandish things now. It's the same. It's just a different person.
Were you ever tempted to get in there and do the fighting yourself?
Oh yeah, in the early part, that's what I wanted to do. I thought I could, I thought it would be, something that was cool to do, and I thought I could do well at it. I'd been training a long time in different things, and it never worked out. And I honestly, I look at it now, and I say, I give all praise to Horian Gracie, who said, I need you to referee, and he did me the greatest favor in the world by giving me that spot and putting me there, because if I had fought, I'd been like everyone else. I'd done okay against some of the early guys, and then you get into the guys as the sport started to progress, and you look at how good some of them were. I'd have been out of the sport long ago, and because of what he did for me as far as putting me in there as a referee, I am still viable in the sport to this day. I work all over the world. I work every weekend somewhere. I was doing fights last night. I'll be doing fights tomorrow. And I get to stay a part of something that I truly love. So, I mean, to sit there and go back and say, oh yeah, you know what? I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I am so lucky he put me in that position. And, I'm just lucky the way it worked out.
I know Patrick's eager to jump in, so before I do let him jump in, I'm just going to ask you one last question. Now, obviously, you've refereed, no exaggeration, thousands and thousands of fights. Is there any one fight that you look back on and you think, I got it wrong, I made the wrong call?
Oh, absolutely. Look at it. I tell people all the time, the guys that are refereeing, we're all human, and humans make mistakes, and you're going to make a mistake. The big thing you do with that is, you got to be honest about it. Don't try to say no, it wasn't a mistake. Don't try to hide it. Don't do the things that people naturally do when criticism comes their way. What you want to do is own up to it. Say, yes, I made a mistake, and figure out how did you make the mistake? Why did it occur the way it occurred? What can you do to make sure that doesn't happen again, and then move on? And that's really, as a referee, you got to have thick skin, and you got to have a short memory as far as things. The one mistake, and I've made several. There's no doubt about it. But I had the one that it kills me to this day is Murillo Bustamante versus Matt Lindland. I have people ask me all the time, is there any call you? I said, absolutely. And that's the fight. That's the first one I'll go to, because it was a championship fight. I saw something. I thought I saw it, and then I had someone tell me no, and I was not decisive enough to say, bullshit, I know what you did, and that's it, it's over. And at the time, I couldn't put them back in the same position based upon the rules, so I had to start these guys in the stand-up, and I was totally unfair to one fighter over another, and that's my job, is to try to make sure that the fighters both have an even platform and that everything is fair between, what I'm doing for them as far as for the good of the fight and the good of the fighters. And, obviously it wasn't for Murillo. And he knows, I've talked to him about it, and I feel bad to this day about that fight. I feel horrible.
Did it not make you feel better knowing that he went on to win the fight anyway? I mean, he literally submitted Lindland twice in that fight, didn't he?
He literally had to win twice with me that night. That's what's so unfair for him.
I am cheating, but I am going to ask you one last question because I have been a big fan of yours for a long time. I remember watching one of my favourite TV series, watching Friends, and of course I spoke to Bruce Buffer earlier on in the week, and we talked a little bit about this. And of course there was an episode where you were on. What was it like being part of Friends?
At the time it was great because the UFC was under a lot of heat at the time from a lot of places, and it was nice that Friends wanted to put something out there that brought our sport to the attention of people. It may not have been in the greatest light, but it was really cool because Friends at the time was like the #1 show out there, and it was interesting. It was funny because it was my wife's favorite show at the time, and she says, "I'm going to watch," right? And I go, maybe you don't want to, right? She said, "Why? Why would I?" I said, "Well, maybe you might not. You like those people so much, you might not like them the same after you meet them and stuff, or something like that. Maybe it would be good." That didn't last long. She went, but it was a lot of fun to do. We got to be there for a couple of days with Bruce and Tank and. Guys like Tito and everybody were there. It was just a fun experience.
Well, I know Patrick's eager to jump in. Are you good to go, Patrick?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I'm chomping at the bit, Ray, and Big John, thanks again for your time. We really appreciate you coming in.
That's my pleasure.
Fantastic. Now, of course, you've been involved with MMA since the sport was essentially invented. What do you think about the current state of MMA? Of course, you and Ray touched on it a little bit. I mean, it's come leaps and bounds since its inception.
Yeah, it's completely different, and it is now a sport that, and the most important thing to me is that everyday average people that may not be even huge fans of the sport, but they know of it. They understand that the people that are involved in it are not thugs and are truly gifted athletes, and you have to be a gifted athlete to be someone that competes in the sport now. It's completely changed as far as being just the technically best, to where you've got to have a lot of different elements to be successful in the sport of MMA today. And so that, the nicest thing for me to see is the acceptance of the sport by mainstream people now.
Yeah, it's absolutely great to see that, and especially with different sports, they've got a lot of different figures that perhaps aren't the most admirable, and like you said, it's just good to see that people know, hey, you've got guys like Joe Lozon who have their computer science degrees, and it's not just hooligans off the street, looking to get into a legal fight. Having said that, what do you think needs to happen for MMA to take the next big step to maybe get to that MLB, NBA, NFL level?
I'm not saying this in a way that's putting anybody down. The biggest problem I see right now with MMA is the separation of the UFC from everyone else, basically. In that look at the UFC is the NFL of MMA. There's football played all over North America, but everybody that wants to go and be the best wants to go to I don't care if you're a CFL player, you want to go to the NFL.
Right.
You're a professional football player in the CFL, but your goal, if you could, is to get to the NFL. And, that's every fighter's goal, is to get to the UFC. The biggest problem is we have a huge amount of space between some of the lower promotions that we have and the upper one of being the UFC. You have Bellator's, it's riding in there a little bit. We've lost a lot of them, lost Strikeforce and things like that. And it's very important. The problem is the UFC can only hold so many fighters. And there's a lot of, the sport is getting more and more athletes in it all the time. And some of these guys, they're fighting really well, but, they can fight and make it to the UFC and, be it one thing or another, not do well, and all of a sudden they're out, and there's really nowhere of that next range for them to sustain themselves as a fighter, to make a living. They've got to do a lot of other things, and it would be nice if we had just some, more ranges of the fighters to be able to fight on shows that they could make a decent living. I'm not asking for them to make, huge money, but a decent living where they could actually, pay for their, existence and still train and be the professional athlete that they're trying to be.
Yeah, that sounds great. And hopefully, with Bellator moving to Spike and getting their exposure, I mean, they were getting maybe 200,000 views on MTV2, and now they're doing 5 times that, getting 1 million viewers plus on Spike every week. So hopefully that'll be a good intermediary for fighters to go to and maybe even get to the same level as the UFC one of these days. I know their tournament format is really popular these days. Now, recently, back in '08, you started the Command.
He's dropped off.
Shoot.
Let me just try and ring him back.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, John. You dropped off.
All right, yeah. All of a sudden it went dead.
Cool. Patrick, you carry on?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Sorry
we're
about
doing
that.
good.
It wasn't me. I was
No.
sitting there, and all of a sudden I think, I'm talking to nobody.
Quite all right. Let's move on a little bit. Back in '08, you started the command course for MMA judging and officiating. Are there any principles you try to teach there that perhaps aren't really implemented currently in refereeing or judging?
Well, there's a lot of things, I'm trying to get across to, the students of it. Refereeing is a lot different. It's a lot different now than it was in the past. It's a lot different than what most people think. And, what I'm trying to get across to the people that I'm teaching is the importance of what they're doing, the importance of what they're doing to the fighters who train very hard, who work their asses off to get to a certain point. I try to point out to them the importance of what they're doing, and the importance of understanding that they have responsibilities, and those responsibilities to the fighter. They have responsibilities to the fans, but what the fans always want and what's best for the sport and what's best for the fighters are not always the same. And their responsibility lies in the safety of the fighter. And they need to do the right things for the fighter. They need to understand when fighters are in trouble. They need to understand things that the average fan doesn't understand as far as what they're looking at, what they're seeing, what the results and what can happen off of what is occurring. There's a lot there, and there's a lot to learn. I make them, to pass my course as far as refereeing, there's a series of tests you're going to have to take. You have to take 4 tests. I make you get at least a 90% to pass it. And
Oh, wow.
Because, I look at it, it's like, okay, do I want someone passing with a 70%? I'm putting that person in a cage with a fighter that their life or livelihood is possibly in the hands of this person. Well, you know what? Bull. You shouldn't be able to pass with a 70. You should have to pass with, you want to be with them, then pass with it, get a 90 and you can pass. If you can't get that 90, then try harder. That's all I can tell you. But, I look at it, it's important. It's important that they know what they're doing. It's important that they know how to do it. And, just passing my course is not near enough for someone to sit there and say, oh, I'm ready. And it's the biggest problem you'll see with MMA officials that I see happening is because the government, we have athletic commissions that run combative sports, boxing and MMA. If you want to be a referee in football, you want to be an umpire in baseball, you want to be a referee in basketball, any of them, where do you start out? Well, you start out in the Little League for, baseball, or Pee-wees for the football. And then if you are doing well there and you want to move on, then you move on. And if it's the baseball, you move on to the pony leagues. And from the pony leagues, you move into like high school. And from high school, you can move into either collegiate, NC2A, or you can move yourself into single A, double A, triple A ball. And if you're very lucky after that, you might get to the major leagues. And you've taken about 15 years to get to that point.
Yeah.
Well, MMA and boxing, we have people that think, okay, I'm going to go take a course, and then they take a course, and we'll say they pass the course. So they pass a course, and now after 1 year, they're like, I want to be in the UFC. Well, it's great that that's your goal, but there's no way in the world that you have done enough fights, experienced enough bad things happening in the fight, because anybody can go and stand in a cage and have two fighters put on a great fight that you really have nothing to do in there. You don't have to make any calls. You don't have to do anything. They just put on this phenomenal fight, and anybody could have been standing in that cage. It's when things go bad that separates the referees. When things start to go bad, it's how does the referee handle it? What are they doing? And a lot of times people don't understand the difference between a good referee doing something or someone that's doing it wrong. And so you want to be able to have those experiences that you'll get through doing amateur fights, doing a lot of smaller pro shows and things like that. So you get that experience. So eventually when you can make it to a UFC, when something bad happens, you don't screw up in front of the world. But we get guys all the time that, after a year, hey, I'm ready. And it's ridiculous. They're not ready. Look at the guys that have been doing this for a long time that people look at that are doing a good job. They've done a lot of fights. Now, I hear people all the time talking about, I've done, I heard someone recently, 12,000 fights. Someone says that and it's like, you're a liar. That's just as plain as it gets. There's no way you've done that many. But that's okay, whatever someone's going to say. But the whole thing is the experience that you need to have to be good at this, it takes time. And it takes commitment, it takes work, and you've always got to be trying to evolve and understand the changes of what's going on in our world as far as, MMA to be effective with the fighters. And that's the kind of things that, I'm trying to put out in that course. And I'm trying to tell them, look, just because you pass it doesn't mean you're ready.
Yeah, that makes a world of sense. I mean, you lose anything in life. That's how it works. If you want to be a carpenter, an electrician, there's a system of graduation. You start as an apprentice, and then you move up through the ranks, or even with yourself in law enforcement, it's the same way. You don't start off as the sergeant. You got to work your way up, and people just need to put in that time and get that experience. But it's been fantastic having you on, Big John. We could talk all day, I'm sure, as long as you let us talk your ear off. But before we let you go, just give you a chance. We know you have your gym going on, your school, you're reffing fights all the time. Just go ahead and feel free to shout out whoever you want. Let the fans know how to follow you on Facebook and Twitter, and feel free to shout out any projects you have going on.
If anyone wants to follow me on Twitter, it's John McCarthy MMA. Love to have you on there. For Facebook, you can go to John McCarthy, and it'll have one that says Big John on it, I guess, or something like that. They can always go to my websites that I have. For the command course, it's MMAreferee.com, and if you want to look at the gym and possibly come out this way, it's BJMUTA.com. So appreciate you letting me do that.
We really appreciate you coming on today, John. Well, I was very excited when you agreed to come on, so thank you very much for your time. It's been a real honour talking with you.
Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. You take care.
And you. Speak to you soon, hopefully, John. Bye.